It is always just one judgment of society that the perpetrator is guilty and he is a horrible person. And of course, that is a terrible thing, and I wouldn't want to experience it ever again. And I also wouldn't wish that to happen to anyone. But reconciliation and forgiveness can, in my opinion, only happen if I can understand why this person has done that. That is possible for me to understand because of my near-death experience, because his whole biography had opened up to me.
Miss Mehner, you have written a book with the title The Big Departure. A very interesting chapter in that book is about the movie of life. And very often other reports about near-death experiences tell us about the process as well, but rarely in depth and without details. How did this work out for you? What meaning did your movie of life have?
That's a good question. I experienced this phenomenon myself as a very important part of my near-death experience. But when I started my research on that topic, I only came across little bits and pieces. And I was thinking how odd, because most of these reports about the movie of life were summed up as a list of different events where people found out how they had done something wrong and unwillingly hurt others. And the typical effect of this was that they were deeply sorry for that. But in my case, a lot of other aspects came up, and I reconsidered and asked myself a lot of questions. Because sometimes people tell us about different scenes of their lives that they had to look at in this movie of life. And I have actually been able not only to look at my whole life and see everything, I have also felt everything and experienced everything that has happened all over again. And this is the most important detail of it. I have also been able to feel and experience everything that was happening from my counterpart's point of view. I also asked myself how this could be that I felt, saw, and experienced it from someone else's point of view. How could I, with my limited logical mind, be able to know so much detailed information about other people's perception? Those were information that I have never collected during my whole life. They were never part of my own past. They belonged to somebody else's past. And I have actually been shown whole biographies of people which have opened up before me. And I really started to do research on that. And I came back to this basic, fascinating question. Is my memory only something that exists in my brain? Is it just a summary of everything that I can recall as an event of my past? Or is it something that goes far beyond that? Is it possible that the brain acted as an interface between my own consciousness and a much greater consciousness, almost like a collective consciousness that holds all records and contained all memories? And all of that was revealed just because I was outside of my body in the moment when my own movie of life was revealed to me during my near-death experience. And then I considered the sheer, gigantic amount of information that was presented to me in such a short time. I probably couldn't tell everything that I had seen in this amount of time, because it would take weeks to repeat it verbally. And I also would have to enter another state of awareness, because my everyday life brain couldn't possibly recall everything that was represented to me in my movie of life. I guess I don't even have the necessary brain storage capacity anyways to repeat everything. I would have to connect to that huge pool of consciousness again that was available to me back then. Another aspect of it was the fact that I wouldn't even dare to tell everything I have seen because I would violate some personality rights of various persons who were involved. Because it is also about shame and other things nobody needs to know about. Maybe other people who have had near-death experiences are not willing to talk about their movie of life in detail either because of this reason.
Many people with near-death experiences report that they weren't only able to relive their own lives again, but that they experienced the feelings of those other people involved. Did you try to verify such information given in your near-death experience? Did you try to research on that with the help of the people involved?
I have tried to verify those insights, but I couldn't get very far. I didn't want to reveal the reason for my questions, and therefore it wasn't easy to justify them. And so I tried to meet these people multiple times to ask them questions about certain events. But since I have become a more sensitive being after my near-death experience, I could sense the resistance from a person if they didn't want to dive deeper into certain topics. I always accepted that reaction and I drew back, as always when something like that happens. Then I put it back to the goodness of the whole, or I put it back to my light and I say, here you are. I give everything back to you. I'm not responsible anymore. I'm not in charge of this anymore, and that is very relieving. But there was one situation where I had the courage to arrange an encounter with a person to truly verify the circumstances of an event that I had experienced. And I am very thankful for my own courage to get in touch with this person and stand face to face with this person. Because in this situation, I have found out that that event must have actually happened the way it was shown to me in my movie of life. It was important to me to verify this event, and I actually sensed it in the here and now, that I have been shown the truth, even though I have known this already within me. Even more so years after my near-death experience, when I fully understood what this sequence of my movie of life was about. It was good to be able to verify the event simply because I just wanted to have a proof without doubts. And then something very touching happened, because I understood the motivation behind the deeds of another person. I knew why he has acted that way and no other way, which was also influenced by me. A movie of life does not only consist of happy moments, it also contains many unhappy moments, which aren't always caused by my own bad actions or decisions, but they are also often caused by others doing us wrong or hurting us. And to have the chance to look at the bigger picture of those scenarios and to realize with my whole body why those situations have occurred was really the key to a total transformation of this whole incident, because this process of realization solved the whole situation. This might sound strange, but I'm sure it's exactly what happens in every successful therapy. If I get to a point where I understand within me and where I can forgive within me, only then I am free. And I wouldn't want to miss this moment. It has cost me a lot of strength and willpower, but I have also received so much courage from my near-death experience. Not being afraid of death means also not being afraid of life. And not being afraid of life means to face all of our life topics and main themes. Even those that we are fearful about or insecure about, or where we feel that we can't get any further. And then you can ask yourself, what exactly is going on here? And very often you get to a point where you realize that no one actually wants to hurt the other one. But that in certain constellations, it's just about the inability to be the best version of your human self. And to realize that, that reminds me of the moment of freedom that I experienced in my near-death experience. And when I can get to that point of freedom in my physical life, then this is a wonderful reason to live. That's also an aspect that we oftentimes do not appreciate enough. When talking about dying or living, I also wrote that down in my book that people don't appreciate life enough. And what exactly is life? What do we actually lose when we die one day? And why are we feeling sadness for if that day comes for someone? I noticed that when I had conversations with people about my near-death experience and they realize how relaxed I am regarding the topic death, they are quite shocked about me dealing in such a non-resisting way with all of these things related to death. But I have that same relaxed way to deal with everything related to life. Because I'm not afraid of life anymore, and I'm also not afraid anymore of all of those uncomfortable and unwanted emotions that we'd like to push far, far away from us.
And in near-death experiences, people are confronted with the whole truth about the consequences of their actions on others when being shown the movie of life. They can't run away, they can't ignore, and they can't escape the confrontation with their life's truth. Do you think that everyone can actually bear that amount of truth about themselves?
Oh yes, I think so. When you are outside of your body, you are already in another state of consciousness. And my movie of life actually was happening at the same time as being with the presence of light. I was already in the light, so what could have happened to me? And that's exactly the self-revelation without a runaway guarantee. As soon as I realize that I have made a mistake, and I am sorry for it, I regret it. But at the same time, I also know what the reason for it was and why I couldn't do any better at that time. And we are people with limitations. Nobody is perfect, and then there are some people who think that we are here to gain a lot of experience, and if we consider this, then of course it's okay to make a lot of mistakes, because we gain a lot of experience with them, and we can learn from them. The point is, are we willing to learn from our experiences? If we have done something wrong, it would be very important to cultivate an attitude where we are sorry for it and we apologize to the people involved, or at least ask for an open conversation. The sad thing is that a lot of people are even afraid to ask someone for an honest conversation. They actually prefer to accuse others and say, "You have hurt me," and constantly keep complaining about it and stay in a stage of separation instead of having an honest conversation. I also meet such people and I tell them, if you want to live like that, go ahead. I would solve this problem in another way, but it is your decision and I cannot force you to do something else.
That's a way to deliberately stay in emotional bondage.
Exactly. And for me, that's part of world peace and peace in everyday life. I think about this quite a lot since I've had my near-death experience. Why don't we get there to have healthy relationships, to build relationships that are loving and caring? Why is war imminent in so many regions of the world? Of course, many times there are no easy and simple solutions, but in everyday life, I observe that so many people are not courageous enough. It is possible to clear up difficulties between people if we take the time to talk, to listen, and to work it out together. We must give each other space for this process. And also, we evaluate too fast. We build a judgment and then we constantly let our own view of the world run down over other people's existence. And then we are surprised if it doesn't work out. I also do that sometimes. I haven't turned into an angel either. I make these mistakes too, from time to time. But I have observed that I see others from a much wider range of perspectives, and it's intimidating to them. Or let's put it in this way, in contact with me, people start to become aware of their own emotional, unfulfilled needs. And then something very interesting happens. I observed that very often I am held responsible for the unfulfilled needs of someone else. So if something doesn't work out in close contact with me, others tell me I am the reason why. But lately, I consider it as the other way around. I am just the trigger for something within the other person, and the reason lies within them. And if this person is not willing to look at the root of the problem within himself, search for the cause of it and maybe analyze it, maybe even together with me, the difficulties will remain. Someone once told me he is allergic against me, but even then an allergy is only a response to a specific trigger and not the cause of the problem. The cause of an allergy lies within the person who suffers from the allergic reaction.
Do you have the impression that with the film of life, aspects and experiences are put into the focus that previously had been a taboo?
That is a very good question. A near-death experience makes you already a lot more courageous, but in my case, the movie of my life made me even more courageous because it had such a tremendous impact and so much meaning for me, especially in breaking the silence about taboos. I think we, living in the 21st century, have created a world for us with the possibility of openly, freely, and honestly discussing all kinds of topics, on the one hand, but on the other hand, there still do exist many taboos. And one of them is, for example, the near-death experience in itself. Someone who has had a near-death experience is very likely to be judged someone who is nuts if he isn't lucky enough to find a scientist who tells him that something like this is actually possible. Death and dying is also a taboo. Who is talking about dying? Either it's something horrible and nobody wants to have to do something with it, or it gets even idealized. The concepts we have of dying are also not contemporary anymore, especially since we are capable of creating a peaceful, dignified process of dying with the help of palliative medicine. But that is also a taboo. And then the third taboo is, and that is where my own experience with the movie of life comes in, that being exposed to the tremendous amount of information about my own life, an incident came up that I had already repressed. Repressing memories can be a relief for the moment, but it's obviously not always the best way to deal with traumatic experiences. In my case, it was an act of violence that I had to endure, and not an act of violence that I had committed. Both sides are part of the movie of life, doing something to others and having experienced what others had done to us. I always ask myself, when I read about reports from near-death experienced people, why are they constantly talking about what they had done to others and not about what others had done to them? Why does nobody address and communicate that? Are we not courageous enough? I started to become courageous enough, and I reported that something has happened that I wasn't aware of and that I would have never ever considered possible. But I felt a lot of fear concerning this topic, and when I was ready to face it, and when I wasn't fighting against that big fear anymore, my everyday life consciousness opened up into that huge pool of consciousness again that I had access during my near-death experience. And this sequence of my movie of life opened up before me for post-processing, and I'm really thankful for that. The offense was sexual assault and sexual abuse as a little girl. And sexual abuse is a huge taboo in our society. Let's consider that only 4% of the population have had near-death experiences and therefore are in touch with a taboo. And in addition to that, sexual abuse is a huge taboo too, and we don't talk about it as well. mostly because we are terribly afraid of it, because it is a taboo taking place inside of families and in the neighborhood. And every child that is involved in sexual abuse is of course willing to and prepared to protect its own system. So I was confronted with that again, and I was able to relive this incident all over again. And the great thing about it was that I was able to understand my offender. It is always just one judgment of society that the perpetrator is guilty and he is a horrible person. And of course, that is a terrible thing, and I wouldn't want to experience it ever again. And I also wouldn't wish that to happen to anyone. But reconciliation and forgiveness can, in my opinion, only happen if I can understand why this person has done that. That is possible for me to understand because of my near-death experience, because his whole biography had opened up to me. Of course, the offender was actually a pitiful person who hadn't adequately dealt with his own life experiences. How many traumatic events of sexual abuse or physical abuse are not adequately dealt with at all? And then they get repeated in chains of sexual violence or physical violence generation after generation. For this aspect, a near-death experience is a very good thing. I would wish that science would put much more emphasis on that and would put that much more into the center of attention. Or even better, to use the concepts of a movie of life for therapeutic purposes in therapeutic settings, especially the aspects of seeing the same situations out of another person's perspective. But I can also say that today, no matter how horrible it was, no matter how bitter it was, and no matter how it has made my life, that through this profound examination of that subject, the whole topic is healed today. I admit that there are some little bits and pieces that are still kind of triggering for me in everyday life. Actually, it is a fact that it's very hard to fully transform the body's memory in all aspects with trauma therapy. But that is not the goal anyway. The goal is to integrate it and to be able to live a good life with it. And I have definitely fully achieved that. I also think that by examining this topic so effectively, I have also been able to interrupt that pattern for the next generation to come, for my own children and for future generations. Because strangely enough, I know families where these patterns have repeatedly occurred in many, many generations. I hope that by talking about it, by reflecting on it, and by raising public awareness of it, I help others to avoid situations where such things can occur. And I would like to add another aspect, if I may, because those women, and men as we now know, it's not only women who are affected by it, a lot of these people that are dying now have experienced war and have been victims of the most violent sexual assault and abuse. And it has never been talked about. War trauma is, of course, a topic of its own in Germany anyway, but this aspect of it especially. I have a very close friend who is working in palliative care, and I have also written about this in my book. She has told me that oftentimes she is sitting at the bedside of these people, and then they report to her. Although she is kind of a stranger, they report to her in form of a live confession experiences with massive sexual violence and abuse shortly before walking over the threshold. And that getting rid of such a heavy burden is obviously a huge relief, and also probably a reason why they're able to let go and release and relax. This enables them to die peacefully and more easily. I think it's important to reflect on that aspect and to raise the question, how can we be more courageous? And without tearing each other apart, how can we distinguish and consider and discuss the taboo subjects of our lives in a sensitive way? and within that, raise the question of the meaning of life. What do we have to learn? Why is life always drenched in violence and difficult situations and severe emotional conditions? And may I mention one last thing? With that, we return to the religious question of a punishing God, because a lot of people I met have actually turned away from God because they couldn't get an answer to the question, why does God allow so much pain and sorrow in my life? Why does God hurt me like that?
Why does He allow it to happen?
And that's where they combine it with the question of the existence of God. I personally don't ask myself this question anymore, because I think it's a redundant question, it's a man-made question, and I don't need this anymore, because life is everything. There is no life that is just happiness and beauty and joy. That is what we think we want, but it is not realistic. And we repressed everything else, but life is always everything, and we have actually forgotten that living in a rich country like Germany, because we are pampered. We live without any worries or sorrow, it seems. But actually we have so many worries around us that make our lives miserable. But actually we ourselves make our lives miserable with those worries. And finding pleasure today in asking the question of the meaning of life and allowing new facets of life to emerge, that is why I am grateful for and glad that I didn't die back then.
Miss Mehner, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us and for a lot of precious impulses. Thank you for this interview.